Hello, welcome to the Coffee Conversation hosted by the Hugh Lane Gallery on the 4th of August 2021. My name is Aoife, and today we will have the pleasure of looking at the work Big Bird by the artist Niki de Saint Phalle, which is a freestanding sculpture that manages to beautifully encapsulate the style and vibrant joie de vivre of de Saint Phalle's art. One of the most important female artists of the 20th century, Niki de Saint Phalle became famous internationally, initially for her shooting paintings and later for her large-scale sculptures. Her art contained elements of pop art, folk art, surrealist art, while simultaneously being art that does not conform to any of those styles. Instead, her work has always been informed by deeply personal points of reference. Her work can be aggressive, violent, comforting, dark, uplifting, completely encapsulating everything about the artist and her experiences. Her signature has become the Nana figure, this large-scale, energetic, curvaceous sculptures of women who represent the newfound independence of women in the second half of the 20th century. Her work is heavily inspired by artists like Antoni Gaudí, Matisse, and Picasso. In particular, Parkway in Barcelona by Antoni Gaudí was very influential for her and inspired her to create monumental figures in outdoor garden settings. Big Bird represents another important part of Niki de Saint Phalle's life, her struggles overcoming illness and her longing for freedom. Like all her art, it is a personal work, a microcosm of who she was and what she brought to the world. Niki de Saint Phalle was born on the 29th of October 1930 as Catherine Marie-Agnes Dalle de Saint Phalle, the daughter of the Comte and Comtesse de Saint Phalle. She quickly was given the nickname Niki by her mother, and the Saint Phalles were one of the oldest aristocratic families in France, apparently dating all the way back to the Crusades. Her father, André Phalle de Saint Phalle, was a young banker who was ruined by the stock market crash of October 1929. He was so tied up in trying to recover his fortune that he did not have time to go back to Paris for the birth of his first daughter, Niki. A few months after her birth, Niki's mother, Jacqueline de Saint Phalle, joined her husband in New York, leaving her newborn daughter with Niki's grandparents, where she was raised in the family chateau. The Saint Phalle family regained their fortune in time, and Niki went to join her family in New York in 1933, where she was raised. Niki de Saint Phalle suffered an enormously abusive childhood, being both physically and sexually abused by her parents. Niki's mother was a strict woman who sent her daughter to a convent school and disciplined her very harshly. Her mother's punishments were extreme, beating her children and force feeding them regardless of how ill they became. While on holiday in the summer of 1942, when she was nearly 12 years old, Niki fell on her way out of a field and was blocked in her path by two intertwined snakes on a rock, which terrified her. This moment, this image would become eternally linked in her mind to the sexual abuse she would suffer at the hands of her father a few days later. In her autobiographical book in 1992, Niki de Saint Phalle refers to this time as the Summer of Serpents and writes that the father I loved so dearly has become the object of hate. The world has shown me its hypocrisy. I understood that everything I'd been taught was false. As she grew older, Niki was discovered by a modeling agent at a dance in Manhattan, and she began a successful modeling career at age 17, doing a series of photo shoots for fashion magazines and appearing on the covers of Life magazine and French Vogue. Shortly afterwards, she met Harry Matthews in 1947. The two fell in love and were married in secret, deciding to elope to France, with Niki turning her back on her family who had caused her so much pain. Her life was changed by a sudden nervous breakdown in 1953. Niki and Harry had moved to Nice, where shortly after she discovered Harry's infidelity that led to her suffering a breakdown. She started to collect pointed objects and walked around with knives and anything dangerous and pointed. After the discovery of this arsenal, she was taken to a medical clinic in Nice to receive treatment. And it was there she would discover her personal voice through art. She used her art as a way to treat herself and was released after just 6 weeks. She said about the experience, "My mental breakdown was good in the long run because I left the clinic a painter." After the clinic, she felt stifled and wanted to devote herself entirely to her work. So when she and her family moved to Paris when she was 22, she began dedicating herself to art, taking up a studio in Montparnasse at l'Impasse Ronson, a dilapidated selection of wooden shacks where a vibrant artistic community made their work. In a studio in Montparnasse, she met Jean Tinguely, a Swiss artist who had begun to make a name for himself in Paris and the art world. Around this time, she began growing further apart from her husband, Harry Matthews. In 1958, she began work on a series of assemblages that she used the same objects she'd previously collected, this arsenal of razor blades and cutting instruments, and seemed to imprison them inside her pictures. As she shows how this aggression was still inside her in this way, and shows that she still had a lot of mental trauma. Niki and Matthews separated in the summer of 1960. In spite of this, she remained a lifelong friend with Harry Matthews. Following the separation, she left her 2 young children with their father and went to live in the Impasse Ronson on her own without an income, determined to make a living as an artist. Much of her work over the course of her life was about overcoming issues with how she was raised and her childhood experiences. Early on in her career, she deals with this by avenging herself, using violence to create destruction. In this way, her early work can be seen as a form of self-therapy, one that helped Niki de Saint Phalle to finally reach the point in her life where she could create more joyous works such as Ananas and Big Bird. The beginning of her violent exploration in art began in 1961, when, after some problems with one of her lovers, she felt the need to exercise her aggression. So she stole one of his shirts, put it into one of her assemblages, and created this work entitled Saint Sebastian, or Portrait of My Lover, aiming to free herself from the lover who haunted her. In this work, the figure of the man is depicted with a dartboard acting as a head. This becomes the object of the artist's aggression, where she would throw darts at the head. Jean Tinguely loved the work and invited Niki to exhibit with him in February 1961, where she hung her work for the first time at an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. She also put some darts on a stool near the work and invited visitors to aim at the dartboard themselves. That day, while she was watching the visitors having fun with her darts, Niki de Saint Phalle came up with the idea to make a painting bleed. Darts were no longer enough, and she came up with the idea of creating paintings with a rifle. She didn't really know exactly how to make these paintings bleed, so she experimented by placing large pockets of paint inside bags on a wooden board and covering it all with a thick layer of plaster. She hung the work in the studio courtyard and, along with Jean and a small group of friends as her audience, she drew a rifle and fired at the work. This was the beginning of her shooting paintings. The shooting paintings were pure white plaster reliefs, inside of which contained bags of paint. Once shot, the paint would spill out across the white surface, creating art through its own violence, like blood seeping from wounds. These works can be said to be both a protest, a criticism of the world, and a liberation for the artists. The violence through shooting became for her a type of ritual, a way to vent and express her anger at the world in a peaceful manner. She said that in 1961, I shot at daddy, all men, small men, tall men, big men, fat men, my brother, society, the convent school, my family, my mother, all men, daddy, myself, men. I shot because it was fun and it made me feel great. I shot because I was fascinated watching the paint bleed and die. I have killed the painting. It is reborn. War without victims. These rifle performances gained a great deal of attention in the art world, with one of her shooting sessions being televised on the news. She gained international recognition for these works. In 1 month, shooting works in Amsterdam, in New York, Stockholm, and San Francisco. In her firing sessions in Amsterdam and Stockholm even, she invited spectators to shoot bullets themselves at the plaster assemblages. In Paris in June 1960, only 5 months after beginning these shooting paintings, Niki opened her first ever solo exhibition, Fire at Will. She became a member of the Nouveau Realists, a French avant-garde group who formed around the critic Pierre Stany. The group included artists like Jean Tinguely, Christo, and Yves Klein. Among these new realists, she found people who encouraged her to create her own art, transforming her emotional difficulties into creative energy. At the end of 2 years in 1963, she felt she had done enough shooting, and in October 1963, Niki de Saint Phalle abruptly stopped her shooting performances. The shooting pictures had provided enough money for her to allow her to buy a former inn in a Parisian suburb, where she set up a more spacious studio and began to create new artworks. In the mid-1960s, Niki de Saint Phalle wanted to tell a story of women who were proud and happy. She would be inspired by her sister Elizabeth and her friend Clarice Rivers, who were both at the time pregnant. As Niki de Saint Phalle's biographer said, surrounded by these pregnant women, she came up with the idea of these nanas, the very expression of creation. In the summer of 1965, she created her first sculptures of these nanas, these women, brightly colored sculptures of the female form with exaggerated proportions, reminiscent of ancient fertility goddess artwork. The first rather rudimentary sculptures were made of wool and paper mache and decorated with hearts and colorful patterns. These works signaled a massive change in her art. She left behind the aggressiveness of her earlier work, instead focusing more on joy and excitement. Her first exhibition of these sculptures was called Nana Power. To her, the nanas represented happy, liberated women, and later independent, benign, contented mothers. Her nana sculptures became very popular in the 1960s, incorporated into ballet and theater design, swimming pools, and even manufactured as inflatables. They became seen by some as archetypes of the new liberated woman. While her initial nanas were made of wool and fabric, Niki de Saint Phalle dreamed of creating huge nanas that could stand out in the middle of public spaces. She wanted them to take charge of the world. She began using polyester in 1964 when it was a new material and no one knew very much about it, saying herself that only much later, after I had largely ruined my lungs, did I become aware of how dangerous a material it is. It almost cost me my life. Nonetheless, by creating these sculptures in hard polyester resin, she was able to create the large-scale permanent outdoor sculptures she wanted. In 1974, Niki de Saint Phalle made 3 polyester nanas for display along the banks of the River Leam in Hanover. These were the Siamese nana, dancing nana, and fat nana. These were made in spite of the protests by local residents who claimed that the nanas sullied the image of the city's founding father, who sat upon a horse as a sculpture a few streets away. This is, of course, exactly what Niki de Saint Phalle wanted. As she once said to an interviewer, "I think I made them so large so that men would look very small next to them." The culmination of her ideas about the nanas was en cathedral, or She a Cathedral, that she created in 1966 with Jean Tingley and Per Ulf Uthvedt at the Moderna Museum in Stockholm. Was a huge nana, built and constructed from fabric and steel scaffolding. and then disassembled after the exhibition. She was a walking temple, a superwoman on a massive scale. Han lay on its back with its legs spread, allowing visitors to enter the structure through the sculptor's genitals, where inside the work they would find a number of attractions, including bars, a library, an aquarium, and a 12-seat cinema that showed films starring Greta Garbo. It was installed from April to July 1966, and over those months, Han was seen by approximately 100,000 visitors. Of course, Han was not the only large-scale sculptural work that Niki de Saint Phalle created. In fact, some of her most famous works were large outdoor sculptures. The Paradis Fantastique was an ensemble of monumental sculptures created in 1967 for the French Pavilion at the World Fair in Montreal. It was created by Niki in collaboration with Jean Tinguely, who was by then her husband, combining Niki's gigantic females with Jean's mechanic structures. Another large-scale collaboration she did with Tinguely was the Stravinsky fountain, which we can see here. From 1983, it comprised of 16 sculptures, some of which made direct references to Stravinsky's work, including sculptures by Niki of the Firebird, the Elephant, the Clown Hat, and the Nightingale. The work was installed in front of the Pompidou Center in Paris, where it stands to this day. She also created the Golem in 1972 in the Rabinovich Park in Jerusalem, the sculpture of a monster whose tongues were children's slides located in a playground. The Golem was built in a mixed neighborhood of Israelis and Palestinians, and the work meant the park became a safe haven for children to play with each other amidst the religious war happening in the city. As Niki de Saint Phalle used polyester, liquid polyester, which enabled her to exhibit these curvaceous sculptures out of doors while still ensuring the brightest, most permanent colors to her surfaces. Unfortunately, the liquid polyester she used was extremely harmful, and she developed emphysema. She underwent a long period of convalescence, which resulted in her changing the pattern of her life and work, spending the years 1975 to 1977 recovering in Switzerland due to the fumes she'd inhaled over the years. While recovering from her illness, she became interested in the theme of air. Big Bird belongs to this body of work from the early 1980s that Niki de Saint Phalle referred to as her skinnies, which she described as her air sculptures. While the nanas were huge and corpulent with heaving bosoms and thick legs, the skinnies were completely different. They are flat sculptures composed of round snake-like tubes and shapes, consisting of heads, birds, figures, serpents, and monsters. The viewer is able to look through the skinnies into the surrounding space, deliberately incorporating light and air of the surroundings into the sculpture. The skinnies signified Niki de Saint Phalle's personal struggle with sickness. They represented the light, airy sensation that her lungs were too damaged to achieve, saying in 1982 that air has come into my life. Breathing deeply, exercising, walking, feeling closer to nature changed me. these sculptures reflect that change. Big Bird from 1982 is typical of Niki de Saint Phalle's best work, with color, exuberance, and playfulness mixed into the piece itself. Big Bird is a freestanding cast polyester sculpture which stands about 5 feet or so above the ground, supported by its twisted metal coil that unfurls below it. The work's vibrant presence is heightened by the polychrome body and the coil lead base that holds it up. This kind of base that seems to almost take on the appearance of licorice or wires or something of that nature. Niki's new introduction of aerial spatial dimensions in her art was the development away from this previously solid voluminous sculptures. In spite that the colors and the motifs remain the same. The voids in the work create space that allow the figure to see through Big Bird and end up creating a dynamic three-dimensional negative space that results in different views, different images from every angle that you look at the work. Big Bird itself was exhibited in Rusk 1981 in Dublin alongside a dancing Nana, and the work was subsequently purchased for the gallery in 1983 as a sublime example of Niki de Saint Phalle's work at her very best. From the mid-1960s onwards, several elements such as bird, goddess, serpents, floral emblems all begin to become hallmarks of her work, but birds were personally symbolic to Niki de Saint Phalle and held a very special place in her work. She said in 1998 that birds have been a constant theme in my work. Immortal birds, sad birds, triumphant birds, the hungry bird. Birds are messengers from our world to the next. My guardian angel is a bird. Birds feature heavily in her work. For example, there are 2 bird sculptures in the Stravinsky fountain, including a firebird. In the University of San Diego, California, sits a sun god, a 14-foot bird, on a concrete arch on the campus. In 1988, she made a relief in ceramic and glass of the phoenix resurrecting from the sea. And perhaps most magnificently, in her tarot garden, she manifested card 19, the sun, as a joyous bird of brilliant colors. When Niki de Saint Phalle was 25, she visited Barcelona, where she discovered Parc Güell, created by Catalonian architect Antoni Gaudí. It was a magical place to her and would remain an obsession for the rest of her life. While in Parc Güell, she studied the technique used to cover the benches, spending hours examining them and learning this technique of trencadis. That is a collage of broken pieces of ceramic and tile laid out together. When she would return to France, she began working in trencadis, as you can see in this self-portrait, sticking bits of broken dishes to her pictures. She walked away from Parc Güell with a dream to one day create a park like that. This dream would eventually manifest in the Tarot Garden, which would take up to 20 years of her life and a large fortune to create. She had always been fascinated by tarot cards and it is a 22 major arcana of the tarot whose figures make up the sculptures in the garden. Her garden was inspired by the Italian fantasy gardens of the 16th and 17th centuries, such as the Villa d'Estra and Bomarzo. She found in southern Tuscany Galerie, part of the family estate of the Caracciolo family, one of the oldest Neapolitan dynasties. And it was there in 1979 that she began to construct her fantasy garden where people could come and be uplifted, diverted, and bewitched. In the late 1960s, she produced a scandal in the art world by creating inflatable nanas to sell as pool toys. She did this to raise funds for her garden. Since Antoni Gaudi had a patron to finance Parkway, Niki didn't want one. She decided to raise the money herself, and so began selling products based on her work. Aside from the inflatable nanas, she created a perfume sold in a blue bottle with intertwined snakes as a stopper. She sold limited editions of vows, boxes, scarves, jewelries, all designed by her, with the perfume alone providing nearly a third of the funding for her garden. This gave her the independence to do exactly what she wanted and create it the way she wanted to. In 1983, 4 years after work started on the garden, the first piece was complete, the Empress, a giant nana in the form of a sphinx. Niki de Saint Phalle built within the Empress a living space where she would live inside what she called her protective mother. The interior of the Empress in this living space is covered in shards of mirror, reflecting everything that goes on inside it. The tarot garden was created by people from all over the world, and she hired local artisans and enthusiastic Italian villagers to help build the garden. She invited friends from abroad to work on the garden, coming from Holland, France, Argentina, and beyond. A ceramicist even came to the local town and taught the Italian women who lived locally how to produce the tiles that would cover the sculptures in trencadis around the garden. In 1997, after nearly 20 years, work was finally completed on the tarot garden. Niki de Saint Phalle viewed the tarot garden as her life's work, and it has been popular with people around the world who have visited ever since. On the 21st of May 2002, Niki de Saint Phalle passed away in San Diego in America, aged 72. She had been weakened by the toxic fumes from the resin she used, and she suffered from respiratory failure. Niki de Saint Phalle used her life to create her art in a non-direct and very personal way, saying that whatever happens in my life is my material. Whatever I feel most strongly about, I express in my art. Throughout her life, Niki de Saint Phalle created apparently simple and playful art, invading public spaces and museums all over the world. Today, her work can be found across the world, bringing joy and excitement to millions of people. Big Bird and her other skinnies invite the viewer to interact with them, to move around and experience them in full. As according to Niki de Saint Phalle, the skinnies breathe, They are air sculptures with mythological subjects. You can see the sky or plants through them. I invite the spectator to look with me through my sculptures. Vibrant color, form and shape, the love of birds, the joy of life, the freedom of space. All of these are wonderfully encapsulated inside Big Bird, which will no doubt continue to entrance viewers for many decades to come. I'd like to thank you all for joining our talk today. If you'd like any further details about future programs, please see our website, and I hope to see you again in the future.